I'm LS swapping this 1974 Corvette Stingray on an extreme budget to prove just how cheap you can build a bulletproof, big power, old school muscle car. In the last episode, I got the 4.8 liter truck motor installed, and today I'm getting it wired up with that custom wiring harness I built in the episode before that. All right, I got the wires pretty much laying where they're meant to be going, I think, more or less. And I want to start kind of zip tying them together and start to kind of construct this wiring harness. And it only seems like I need to stretch out a couple of wires here. The coil wire is a little bit short. I could probably swing it. I was even thinking of taking this thing off and tucking it behind the fuel rail, but I think I want to keep things, as OEM as possible. And the alternator, I think, will also need to be stretched out. So those are the only two that I've found that I need to extend. And there seems to be plenty of room for most of these other wires. So I'm happy about that. It actually saves me quite a bit of a headache there. All right, I got my two plugs cut off here, the two that I want to extend, and I got a ton of wires right here, which is exactly why I keep all of the wires from the donor car, because I should be able to find hopefully exactly or very close color match to all of these wires and maintain the correct color of the wires for my extensions. Okay, I got these wires all extended, and of course now I just gotta connect them to the other side before I forget where they go. Okay, there we go. Two extended wires. All right, lots and lots of hours later, and a ton of wire, routing and cutting and stuff like that. I think I have this thing pretty close to, I guess, finished as far as wiring harness, routing, and all that stuff goes. So we have all of our pink wires here, kind of all stripped out and joined up. We, of course, have one big fuel injector pink wire connection here. So my plan is to divide this up into two kind of main power bundles, one for the injectors because there's 8 wires there, and then another, I guess 8 wires or so for all the other various ECU and throttle cable or throttle module, whatever, all of the miscellaneous things to make the engine run, coils, stuff like that. So I think there's 2 things I got to do next, or I guess there's going to be one thing I'm going to do next, but the next steps are going to be to put the fuse block and relay block, I think, somewhere right here. There's going to be a couple bolts I can mount, a little bit of a, I don't know, some sort of bracket or something, a holder. Not to mention that that's where all the pack of wires are, and that's where the power cable comes in through here. So we'll do that next. Actually, nope, I take that back. We're not gonna do that next. The next thing I'm gonna do is get rid of this huge rat's nest of wires, because these are all of the wires that are gonna go inside the cab. There's quite a few of them, and I also have the plug here, this guy, which is the throttle pedal cable, the throttle pedal wires, and there's a whole ton of them. I'm not sure why. I guess it's kind of a complex thing that goes into an actual little box, almost like an ECU here. Right there, or something like that. I should probably double check that that's correct. Yes, right there. And then this connects to the pedal. So that's gonna go through right there. That's where all the wires come in through the firewall from the factory, and I've eliminated a lot of those. Let's get those guys pushed in through there, and then we can get that sealed back up, and we'll be good to go. All right, awesome. I got this dash pulled out of here and got my first look behind the dash, actually. I haven't seen back here before, and it looks pretty good. No complaints. There's really not any room back here, though. One thing that definitely stands out to me, I think the firewall is just so far back that there's just no dash space. So I'm gonna have to figure out where I'm gonna put things like my throttle pedal modulator thing, but I'll figure it out somewhere. So let's get these cables ran through somewhere up there. I think might be the hole. Yep, right there. So my plan was to unpin all of these connectors here and pass this guy through the firewall, because this connector is kind of really way too big to fit through there. But unfortunately, these connectors, it's like they all unpin this way, so there's actually no way to get this connector off of here. Basically the wire slides through the wrong direction, and it's kind of crazy because on the other end there's also a pin that slides the other way. So they kind of made these connectors unpinnable, and I think my option is to cut all of these individually and solder them back in, but I just kind of don't want to do that because, you know, I'm afraid that's going to lead to like electrical problems. So my other option is to just install this thing in the engine bay. And now that I'm looking at it, here's the other side of this, the gas pedal connector, and it's pretty clear to me that this thing was meant to go in the engine bay. This connector is sealed as well, and you can actually see the firewall plug right here. So I think it's settled, and these do seem to be unpinnable from the correct direction. Like I can pull the wire straight out of here. So I think I'll probably unpin one of these two, pass this wire through the firewall, and then I guess I'll just mount this guy somewhere. I'm thinking like in here. Hopefully I have enough wire. Actually, I don't know if I do now. Shoot. All right, let me figure this out really quick, and then we'll go from there. All right, no problem. These will indeed reach all the way over to, I'm thinking under here. There's so much room back underneath this, inside the fender well. We'll tuck that in there, hide it down in here somewhere, somehow, later. And for now, I will start to pass these wires through the firewall, and then I'm gonna pass all the rest of these guys through the firewall too. And then I think we'll be good for all of the wires I need to go back and forth through the firewall in this thing. All right, so we got all of our wires ran through the firewall over here, right there. Now it's time to wire up the fuse block. So this thing's gonna sit either right here, I'm not sure yet. And I actually have pretty much all of the wires here pretty well laid out. Got my power wires and fused wires. I have some relay, fuel pump relay triggers, some fan relay triggers. So I think the first thing I want to do is start wiring up these fuses here, and I'm going to have to establish some pretty serious battery power, and then also an ignition trigger wire as well. So I'll have to figure out where I'm going to find those, but I have the battery cable coming in right there, so I can just tap right off of that from the starter, and that's going to give us our power for the fuse block. All right, so next up, I think I want to work on some of my heavier gauge wires here. And I got some 6 gauge wire and some 10 gauge wire, and I'm going to use this guy for a custom alternator wire. I'm going to have to rebuild my alternator wire because the battery and the power distribution block and all that stuff ends up in a completely different place. So the alternator is going to be here. I need to run the wire over to that corner. I'm hoping that 6 gauge is okay. It's a pretty chunky wire. It's all pure copper, so we'll set that guy up. And then for this stuff, this is 10 gauge I'm going to use for my fuel pump, because I almost forgot to wire in my fuel pump, which is going to go through the firewall and over to the fuse block. And I think I'll use this stuff for the electric fans as well. And then I got a couple of junction blocks here. So I think we're going to set up one of these junction blocks for power on crank, and then the other one for, I can't remember, I think just battery power, permanent battery power. So I think I'm going to first run the fuel pump wire. That's going to go basically just into the cab somewhere. I'll have to kind of measure it out, and it's going to pop out of the car probably somewhere in this back area. And then we'll get this alternator wire going. All right, I got my fuel pump wire ran through the firewall here. And at first I thought maybe I was going to go through the console up here, but then I thought coming up over this edge right here is probably not that great of an idea. So instead I'm going to just follow the factory wires I found right here. We'll go underneath this rocker panel seal thing here and right up alongside the factory wires and into the fuel pump, which is going to live somewhere in this area right here. So I think I can go ahead and follow it right up into the fuse block, and we can actually permanently, attach it to the fuse block now. All right, we got the fuel pump wired into the fuse block here. So next up is to do the alternator wiring from the alternator basically into the battery. This is where this little junction block here comes in. I think what I'm gonna do is run from the alternator post, which is gonna sit right about there, wrap around the engine, and it'll go into this post. And then the battery cable, which is going into the starter, is going to be connected with this little bit thicker gauge wire. I think this one's like maybe a 4 gauge or a 2 gauge. So the 6 gauge, which is the factory size, I think, for the LS, maybe even a little bit bigger than factory. This guy is going to go into this block, run through the 4 gauge, and then that 4 gauge is also going to give battery connectivity to all of the various permanent battery wires that I need here, which actually will be a lot of them because, a lot of these are triggered, so I can have them on permanent battery. I don't need to run them on ignition power. So like the electric fans and things like that. And yeah, I think this is gonna work out pretty good. All right, sweet. I got all of my wire ends or whatever, terminal ends crimped on here, and there you go. And I think that the fuse block is almost done. There's a few last wires that I don't quite, I know how to route them, but I haven't quite figured out exactly where I'm gonna route them. One of them is the ignition control, which means I need to find a wire that'll be 12 volts on ignition and crank. And then the other wire I need, of course, is just your standard ignition wire, non-crank. I guess we'll need a ground wire there. And speaking of ground, I think I've figured out what I'm gonna do about that one too. I think the idea is to put the ground wire, the main ground wire from the battery, right onto one of the starter bolts. I've always known that to be the best place to ground your battery, because that's going to be where the most flow is going to happen from your battery to your starter. I should say the biggest amp draw is the starter, so that'll also ground the block. And since the Corvette is kind of special that it's a fiberglass body, I'm gonna get crazy with the grounds, and grounds from the frame to the engine, and from the battery post right down to the frame as well. Then I'm going to run a giant ground, basically battery cable sized, from the block to the frame over here too. All right, I went ahead and installed this header down here, or I guess manifold. I wish it was a header. And man, this thing fits absolutely perfectly in here. It's pretty crazy. I've never had any sort of stock manifold or header fit this good out of the box. And even the downpipe, which I'm super happy that I saved, is a perfect position. So this should be pretty easy to link up to the existing exhaust when the time comes. But the wires need to be routed just a little bit differently than I expected. I kind of have them routed outside of the exhaust manifold. Typically I would tuck it back in there, but it just works out really good like this. I have both of the grounds set up over there, and I have both of the power wires set up over there. So I've got all my wires kind of tucked behind the exhaust, and I'm thinking that's going to be pretty good too. I'll probably put some heat shield on those guys. Awesome. All right, so I'm jumping around a little bit here, and the next thing I want to work on is to get this water pump set up. I'm obviously replacing this one. It still works, but it's probably a good thing to do since this guy pretty much looks like the original. I'm sure it is. So the first modification I need to make is to change out these two fittings over here with a couple of right angle hose barb fittings. These do hit the upper control arm of the Corvette, and I'm hoping that these have a tight enough bend. These are like the tightest bends I could find to bypass that. Of course, I got one for the 1/2 inch and then one for the, I think it's a 3/8 pipe thread. So I'm gonna pull these fittings out of there, and I'm gonna tap both of these for pipe thread. And then of course I kept one of these short because only one of these is gonna be able to thread on. And then the other one I'll have to sneak on without hitting the other hose barb, and then I put this thing on afterwards, if that makes sense. So you'll see. But the first thing, I gotta pull these out somehow and tap and drill those guys. All right, got these things out of here. These were a little bit difficult to get out, but vice grips and a little hammer did the trick. So let's get this thing in the vise. I've got some taps here. We'll get this thing threaded. All right, got this thing threaded out, and this thing's threading in there good. It works. I'm definitely gonna have to have this angled, I think somewhere in this area, so I might need to carve that out just a little bit more, just so that the thing tightens up right at the correct spot here. And I can also put some thread sealant on this, so I don't think leaking is gonna be an issue, even if it's not perfectly snug. Cool, all right, let's do the next one. All right, sweet. We got these threaded out, and now let's take a look here. I think I can probably crank it around, but I want to make sure. Let's see here. Make sure this guy fits. So definitely shaved off about 1/2 inch on this side. Shaved off a little bit on that side. There were definitely more problems fitting this guy than this one. So I think we'll be okay. Oh, you know what? Here. Yeah. Yeah, maybe a hair right there at the corner, you know, makes a difference. But I want to throw this guy in here before permanently sort of mounting this thing. And let's see how it fits. All right, got the water pump on here and it's looking good. It's very close. Let me get a flashlight. Yeah, it's close, but it doesn't hit, which is the only thing that really matters. So this guy should be able to angle any way that I want. This one definitely needs to angle, I guess, sort of upwards. I'll have to loop around my heater hose, which is okay. And of course, I put on some other stuff here. Went ahead and put on the big old alternator and power steering bracket and kind of mocked up where the belt would be, because I'm going to do one more modification to this water pump, which has to do with this tube right here. I think I'm going to cut it and weld it to make this outlet go, or I guess inlet, instead of coming up and kind of sending the tube up in this direction, I want to kind of angle it in this direction instead. And I'll probably get as close as I can to this belt, just over the belt, so I leave room for my air intake. The reason is that the only way I've seen people do this swap is to have this giant radiator hose come all the way up around here, because the inlet for the radiator is on the other side, and that is just asking for air pockets to get trapped in this huge radiator hose. So I think I can eliminate a lot of that and kind of make it more custom fit by cutting and welding. All right, there it is. Looks a little bit ugly, but I think it's gonna hold water just fine. And most importantly, this thing is pointed right in the direction that I want it to be. Oh, and I should have probably started with this. Why am I not getting a different water pump that has a better angle for this outlet? It's because I want to keep the truck front spacing for all of the accessory drives. So I don't want to have to change out everything on the front end just because the water pump doesn't point in the ideal direction. And I do know that there's one water pump that I think is like an LS3 Camaro that fits the truck and that has like an outlet somewhere around here, but there was a reason why I didn't go with that one. I think you needed to move a belt and move a pulley and do a little bit more modification. And for some reason, those LS3 water pumps are expensive. I want to say they're like $250. This one was $90, and I'm cheap. And to modify this was free, so there you go. That's my reason.